My presentation is a little more specific than others, and I think because it focuses on the Czech Republic, where some of these democratic problems aren't as severe as in Poland and Hungary. So talking with a lot of students, I think a lot of people see inequality as the big problem of politics today. Rising levels of inequality, a problem in itself, also a source of unequal political power. And populism, in a lot of ways, is a reaction against the perceived power and corruption of elites and billionaires and rich people. And if you know the work by Thomas Piketty, showing rising levels of inequality, especially among the very richest, there was a good point in the mid-century, and then since the 1970s, rising levels of inequality. The Czech Republic tends to be an exception to this. So if you look at a common measure of inequality, it's called the Gini coefficient. The dark line here is the Czech Republic, and it looks pretty good compared to other post-communist countries, and also compared to the EU in general, which has some equal countries like, say, Sweden. But one of the exceptions here is the rising numbers of very, very rich people. And so this is some data on dollar billionaires. There are about 2,000 of them in the world. That's that dark line going up, a rising number of dollar billionaires, a rising number in Eastern Europe. So this is not including Russia and Ukraine. And the Czech Republic sort of even a leader in Eastern Europe in the number of dollar billionaires. So that would be like the six at the bottom line there. And I think the elephant in the room, obviously, is the current Prime Minister, Andrej Babiš, so one of the richest men in the country, one of these dollar billionaires who became the leader of the country. Some of my research is focused on this, and I have a larger project working on it. And here I just wanted to talk quickly about three questions. What do the very rich want? What sort of influence do they have on public policy? And when do they get involved in politics? So taking Babiš as one of these cases. So I wanted to focus quickly on those questions. I have some other issues as well if I have time. So I wanted to start with what do the very rich want in politics? What are their policy preferences? And it's typically difficult to find out. So normal surveys don't include millionaires and billionaires. One of my colleagues who did a survey of them in America said their gatekeepers have gatekeepers. So it's very hard to get access to them to find out what they're interested in. I did interestingly find a survey by the J&T Bank that did a survey of Czech and Slovak millionaires, and that's going to be the source of data I'm going to use here. I have another project where I looked at the public statements of billionaires in the press. So what did they say when they submit to interviews or are quoted in the press? A lot of billionaires don't speak to the press. This is true in America. Most of them don't say anything. Some of them here are talkative. Many of them don't say anything as well. So it's hard to know what millionaires want. But going back to the survey I mentioned, there were not, the J&T Bank did this survey for several years, asked about a number of public policy issues. So millionaires, not surprisingly, were much more free market oriented than the public. So by about 16 percentage points. I'll show you some of the data in a second. I'll show you. So these were some of the economic issues that were asked about, and you can see the differences here. So on the right side are issues that millionaires are more in favor of. On the left side is issues that the public, so they did also a survey of the public, that the public was more in favor of. And I think you can see that the ones that the millionaires supported, increasing the health copay, the spoluúčast in the healthcare, tightening welfare, less state intervention, and the ones that the public tended to support more, raising taxes on the rich, higher taxes, more regulation, supporting citizens. And so the biggest differences here were, in favor of copays, but against raising taxes on the rich. So those are differences between the millionaires and the public. There were smaller differences on sort of different versions of the same issue. So both the public and millionaires want to reduce debt, reduce the tax burden. But when it comes to who is paying, there are big differences. The millionaires were also much more internationalist. So, one of the critiques of populists is that there are these globalists who are running us. And to an extent, that's true. They were about 9% more globalist on the issues that were surveyed, more likely to favor, the millionaires were more likely to favor the euro, membership in the European Union, NATO, sanctions on Russia. The public was more likely to favor increased border security, conscription, leaving the EU. There wasn't much difference on migration or Islam or terrorism. So here again, I know it's difficult to read, there are a lot of issues here, but you can see sort of the big differences on the EU and the euro at the top, and on, again, the EU at the bottom, and border security, and introducing conscription. And then there were some social policy issues where there weren't such big differences, only 2 percentage points on average. Millionaires were more likely to support a smoking ban, restitution of church property. The public was more favorable towards quotas for women. There was some agreement on Roma issues, marijuana legalization, euthanasia. There wasn't so much difference there. And I didn't include the actual survey questions here. Okay, so we know some ways the rich are different in their preferences. They're more libertarian, more free market oriented, more globalist. But on social policy issues, not so different. Can we say how influential they are? And I think one of the big theories is that rich people will tend to be more influential in politics. They're more likely to vote and participate, contribute money to parties. They own media and think tanks, and so can influence public opinion. But some of the research has shown that, in a lot of cases, their preferences are similar to the public. And parties do need votes, not just money. So sometimes they have to appeal to the public. So these are just some expectations of the influence of the rich. So I took the data that I showed you a moment ago and looked at correlations between the preferences of millionaires and the public and the adoption of these policies. There wasn't so much data, so I wouldn't believe these totally. But it didn't seem like there was so much influence on policy. I thought, from these data that the public seemed more likely to see its preferences adopted on economic issues. So those first ones I showed you, the millionaires were more likely to see their preferences adopted in foreign policy. And that may sound wrong to you. How could the millionaires not be more influential in economics? They must be more influential. But, on some of the issues where there are big differences, say the copays in the health insurance system, or the tax on millionaires, the Solidaridad, right? Those are things that, the government revokes the copays on healthcare. There's still a millionaire's tax here. Those are things millionaires don't want, but the public does want them. Yes, and then the foreign policy remains pretty internationalist. The Czech Republic remains a member of the EU, and it hasn't joined the euro. But in a lot of ways, kind of that internationalist orientation, I think the government is sort of compelled to do that. And these are big issues of public policy, so maybe the influence is more on less important issues in regulatory decisions, in privatization decisions. So this isn't a perfect measure of the influence of billionaires, but it is harder to find those other influences. One of the ways that billionaires might be more influential was in their donations to political parties. They have a lot of money. They can give this money and in exchange get the policies they want. I tried looking for evidence of this, looking all the Czech billionaires and looking through the party disclosures of where they received donations from. I looked at some of the billionaires' businesses too. Often they have a lot, so I did look at all of their businesses. But it didn't seem they were giving so much money, at least legally. I was looking at a website called Political Science that looks at all these donations. And there were a few that were very prominent, Ivo Valenta, Andrej Babiš, Zdeněk Bakala, Ludvík Sekyra, who gave a good amount of money, but often it was to their own party. Valenta gave to this party that helped to elect him as senator. Babiš gave to his own party. I didn't find that much evidence of this money, and I think maybe I just haven't been looking well enough, but I think that's an interesting question to keep going on. The donations that I did find were mainly to right-wing parties, to ODS and ANO. The number of donations was higher and the amount of donations, not so many donations to left-wing parties. So you see the Social Democrats and the Communists towards the bottom there. I think one of the interesting trends in recent years is the rise in media ownership by the rich. So since 2008, billionaires have been buying most of the Czech media market. I think there's a little more competition still than in Hungary and possibly Poland. So there are competing billionaires, but the media market has changed a lot, that the billionaires have decided either that this is profitable or this is a way of influencing the public. And I don't think we know so well yet. The purchases by Babiš are probably the key ones here that people have been thinking about. But this has been a big trend in recent years, that these are all billionaires and Czech billionaires, and they've all been buying. And it is interesting that a few years ago, there was a book that came out called The End of the Czech Press. And it was lamenting the fact that the Czech press was owned by German and Austrian conglomerates. Whereas today, I was curious what the author thinks today. And now it is a Czech press, but it's a Czech press owned by these billionaires. So those are some thoughts on influence. The final trend I wanted to talk about was rich people entering politics. And it is a question, why would rich people want to go into politics? So I think there are two possibilities. It could be self-interest. This is their best way to protect and expand their wealth. Or it could be some kind of hobby or duty, that I'm a rich person, I want to give back, I want to make the country better. And I think there are different kinds of, we might look at the characteristics of politicians, and this would tell us about their motivations, that if they are self-interested, probably they don't have a strong ideology, they just want to protect their wealth, they don't have a history of political activism, maybe they're still active in their business, or their business depends on the state, and they feel like the best way to protect it is to go into politics. I think the second motivation, the hobbyism or duty, you'd expect people that have clear ideologies, that have a history of interest in politics, that maybe at the end of their business career, now I will do something. And we can look at some of the Czech billionaires that have entered politics. I think it's a surprising number. Václav Fischer was the first, Vladimir Železný, and then in recent years, Schwarzenberg, Vít Barta, Andrej Babiš, Ivo Valenta, Jiří Hlavatý, Pavel Juříček, and Michal Horáček. Some of these ran for office, some of them lost their elections. But there has been this increasing trend that billionaires want to enter politics. I think, there are different types. I think there's some that it seems pretty clear that it was self-interest. Someone like Železný, who wanted immunity, I think, or Vít Barta, who had this plan to control his industry. Ivo Valenta wanted to, support his industry of gambling.
Professor Roberts, wrapping up, please.
Okay, and then others that look more hobbyist, Schwarzenberg, Horáček, Hlavatý. I think Andrej Babiš is the big question, what his motives are. They tend not to be very active, except the ones that hold executive positions. They don't, when they become senators, they don't do very much. But the ones like Babiš, maybe Schwarzenberg, are more active. So just to conclude, some of the main points, billionaires seem economically more conservative, on foreign policy more internationalist. It's harder to see their influence on public policies, but maybe elsewhere. They haven't given so many direct donations, but do have been buying up media, and they're increasingly likely to participate in politics. And I think that's one of the big open questions that we're not sure why they're doing that.